Antan there from Xinity Group. Straight on to the press review now. She's starting, Erin is with us, with massive demonstrations against anti-Semitism in France on Sunday. What are the papers saying about it, Erin?
That's right. Thanks, Stuart. Well, over 180,000 people marched across France on Sunday. The vast majority here in Paris, a little bit over 100,000. Who were they, asks Aujourd'hui en France today. Local elected officials, deputies, senators, ministers, former prime ministers, and presidents. There were also Jews, non-Jews, Christians, atheists, simply citizens united for the Republic, as the paper writes. Now, according to a poll, 69% of French people supported that gathering, which for the most part, for most of people there rather, is not synonymous with support for the Israeli government. Le Parisien, though, does today remind us in its piece on the bottom there that there was one major person missing, and that was Emmanuel Macron, who instead published a letter in Le Parisien today saying that he was present in his heart and in his thoughts. Now, I'll move on to Libération, because for this paper, it was a surge of national spirit of sorts. They said that the attendees seemed to be surprised themselves at just how many people were present. Libé also notes that Jean-Luc Mélenchon, head of the France Unbowed Party, was an exception in his absence, the leftist leader, of course, having called for a boycott of that event.
Yeah, his absence just one example of some of the latent divisions, perhaps, surrounding this march, Erin?
Exactly, Stuart, and that's what a lot of papers also focused on this morning. It was not all unity. L'Opinion headlines on the illusion of national unity, an editorial in today's edition arguing that never has a call for union been forced to confront the reality of division. It says there's dissidence between participants, dissonance between different political parties, calls for unity being shattered by this new map of France, the paper says, so much so that it prevented the French president from protesting anti-Semitism in order to avoid giving the impression of supporting one side over another. Now, a lot of the controversy surrounding this march, though, of course, it must be said, surrounds the presence of the far-right National Rally, which, of course, has anti-Semitic roots, used to be known as the National Front. That's why left-wing paper L'Humanité here headlines on a tainted march. The editorialist saying that it was nauseating to see the likes of the Le Pens, their allies, Éric Zemmour, who even claimed that France's World War II collaborationist leader, Philippe Pétain, saved Jews. It was nauseating to see these people protesting anti-Semitism in the streets of Paris. She calls it an unprecedented mistake, even obscene instrumentalization. Now, I'll just finish with a piece from Der Spiegel, the German paper, Stuart, which goes a little bit farther, saying its editorialist describing Sunday's march as the day that Marine Le Pen became electable for Jews. The editorialist spoke to multiple people who attended the march and who essentially said that anti-Semitism is no longer coming from the far right, from people like Marine Le Pen, but from the far left. Many then, in that sense, were much more bothered by Emmanuel Macron's absence than by the presence of people like Marine Le Pen. The editorialist saying that that says a lot about how anti-Semitism is essentially confusing French politics.
Meanwhile, of course, that hospital in Gaza we talked about right at the top of the news, that's increasingly taking centre stage in Israel's offensive on Gaza, taking centre stage in the papers as well.
That's right, Stuart. It's on the front page of The Guardian this morning there. No power, no hope, and little water in Gaza's largest hospital complex. Now, that's Dar Al-Shifa. To give an idea of the gravity of the situation, the paper says that nurses there have been struggling to keep dozens of babies, 39 to be exact, alive, as there's no oxygen supply or power for incubators. The hospital has already endured 6 Israeli strikes over the past couple of days, according to the head of surgery quoted in this Guardian piece. Israeli officials have demanded that Palestinians flee to the south, including from hospitals like this one, where thousands of people are either sheltering or receiving really necessary care. Now, the New York Times today, on its front page online, tells readers that Israel claims that Hamas is using this hospital as a cover. The paper says that both sides say that Al-Shifa hospital has essentially become a symbol of the other's borders inhumanity. Israel says it's proof that Hamas is willing to essentially turn its own people into human shields, to sacrifice them as cannon fodder in order to obtain global sympathy for its cause. Hamas says that it's not using the hospital as cover for weapons or soldiers. Hospital officials say that the facility only houses patients, the sick, the kind of the desperate, the needy. Palestinians then largely think that the fixation on Al-Shifa hospital is evidence of Israel's willingness to target civilians, no matter how helpless.
Let's change gears now on the press review. There are some important climate negotiations. They're happening in Nairobi now. Tell us more about this one.
Well, government delegations are gathering in the Kenyan capital, indeed, in order to write up a global plastic pollution treaty, as The Guardian tells us then. According to the paper, experts say that if something comes of it, it really could be the most important multilateral climate treaty since the Paris Accords. Now, discussions today on Monday will be focused on whether or not targets to restrict plastic pollution should be decided unilaterally, or whether states should kind of set their own targets. Either way, an agreement on this matter is pressing, because by 2060, plastic pollution is estimated to essentially triple, with about half of plastic pollution ending up in landfills, and less than a whopping fifth, really recycled, according to a report by the OECD.
Finally from Erin, we're all used to products, aren't we, being rebranded. This is something a bit different being rebranded, though. This is about 100 different bird species.
Yeah, that's right. This is an article from Le Monde today. The American Ornithological Society has announced plans to rename dozens of birds in the U.S. and Canada, which were named after well-known people, but not just any well-known people. They had racist or offensive pasts, so they'll instead be named after things like the species' physical attributes, so it'll become things like long-tailed puffin. Now, Stuart, the organization, as Le Monde tells us, did used to have a species-by-species approach. In 2020, for example, in the wake of the George Floyd protests, it renamed a bird that had been named after a Confederate Army general, but it later decided not to rename a bird that had been named after a well-known ornithologist in the United States who was also a slaveholder and a radical anti-abolitionist. Now they've decided to just make it easy by banning anyone who has any kind of controversial or slaveholding background. The Society's president saying that names have power, they can be used for good or bad, and she wants them to be powerful in a good way.
Just yellow bird, that one there, would sort of sum it up.
Probably. Small-beaked bird, yellow bird.
Yellow bird. Thanks very much, Erin, with the papers for us on France 24. She'll be back in a couple of hours' time, of course. Next half hour today, we're going to bring you our focus report as ever, and today we're reporting from the Paris suburb of Nanterre. Now, if you remember, that was really the heart of the riots here in France just before the summer, after the killing of a 17-year-old by Nahel by a police officer. But our reporters have been back to the suburb, where they found a strong community spirit remains. That's in the next half hour.